A company that spent 70 years telling children, "I don't want to grow up," ultimately died because it refused to grow up itself. Toys R Us wasn't just killed by Amazon, though Amazon certainly helped dig the grave. No, this was a perfect storm of debt, digital disruption, and executives who apparently learned business strategy from a magic 8-ball. Our story begins in 1948, when Charles Lazarus, a man whose last name was either prophetic or deeply ironic, opened a baby furniture store in Washington, D.C. But here's the thing about babies. They grow up, and when they do, they want toys. Lazarus noticed parents kept asking for toys, so he pivoted. It was a smart move that would serve the company well for decades. By 1957, Lazarus had rebranded as Toys R Us because apparently someone decided that backwards R's were the height of retail sophistication. But Lazarus was onto something revolutionary. While other stores relegated toys to a corner next to the vacuum cleaners, he created entire warehouses dedicated to childhood wonder. It was the big box store concept before big box stores were cool, assuming they were ever cool, which is debatable. By the 1980s, Toys R Us had achieved something remarkable. They had become childhood's unofficial headquarters. Their jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid," wasn't just advertising, it was practically a generational anthem. Children would sing it unprompted, which is either brilliant marketing or mild brainwashing, depending on your perspective. Geoffrey the Giraffe became their mascot because, as everyone knows, nothing says trustworthy toy retailer quite like a 14-foot African mammal. Geoffrey was everywhere. Commercials, store displays, probably haunting the dreams of children who'd eaten too much birthday cake. He was less mascot, more benevolent corporate overlord with impeccable brand recognition. The 1990s were Toys R Us's imperial phase. They weren't just selling toys, they were selling experiences. Black Friday at Toys R Us wasn't shopping, it was gladiatorial combat with shopping carts as chariots and Tickle Me Elmo as the prize. Parents would literally fight each other over plush toys that giggled. It was capitalism red in tooth and claw, if capitalism wore children's clothing and came with batteries not included. During the Cabbage Patch Kids craze of 1983, Toys R Us stores resembled something between a refugee camp and a cult gathering. Parents camping outside stores, trading rumors about shipment deliveries, forming alliances based on mutual desperation to acquire a doll that looked like it had been assembled by committee. The company's response was basically to shrug and count the money. But here's where the fairy tale starts to curdle. While Toys R Us was busy being the undisputed king of toy retail, the world was quietly changing around them. Walmart began selling toys at prices that made Toys R Us look like they were pricing items with precious metals. Target started making toy sections that didn't look like they'd been designed by colorblind teenagers on energy drinks. The company's response to this competition was, well, let's call it creative. They decided to compete on selection rather than price, which is like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the knife costs 40% more than everyone else's guns. Then came the internet. In 1995, a small company called Amazon started selling books online. Toys R Us executives probably looked at this and thought, books? How quaint. Children don't read anymore anyway. It was roughly equivalent to dismissing the automobile because horses had been working fine for centuries. By 2000, Amazon was selling toys. Not just any toys. They were selling toys with customer reviews, price comparisons, and the revolutionary concept of shopping in your pajamas. Toys R Us, meanwhile, was still operating under the assumption that parents enjoyed driving to suburban strip malls to wrestle with other parents over parking spaces. The company did eventually launch a website, but it was the digital equivalent of a participation trophy, technically present, but inspiring confidence in no one. Their online store looked like it had been designed by someone who had heard about the internet but never actually seen it. But wait, it gets better. In 2005, private equity firms Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado decided that what Toys R Us really needed was $6.6 billion in debt. Because nothing says sustainable business model quite like leveraging a retail company to its eyeballs during the early stages of a retail apocalypse. This leveraged buyout was like performing surgery with a chainsaw, technically possible, but the patient rarely survives. The new owners loaded the company with debt, then seemed genuinely surprised when this made it harder to compete with companies that weren't spending hundreds of millions annually just to service their loans. Meanwhile, childhood itself was evolving. Kids who once begged for action figures were now asking for iPads. The concept of going to the toy store was becoming as archaic as going to the record store. Children were developing the attention spans of particularly distractible goldfish, and traditional toys were losing the battle to screens that could show them literally anything they wanted to see. Toys R Us tried to adapt. They created smaller, more convenient store formats. They partnered with other retailers. They even opened locations inside airports, because apparently someone thought what air travel really needed was children hyped up on new toy purchases. But it was like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, if the Titanic were also being attacked by submarines named Amazon and Walmart. The final nail came in 2017, when the company filed for bankruptcy. The official reason was the debt burden, but the real cause was simpler. They had become irrelevant. They were selling yesterday's concept of childhood to tomorrow's children, and the mathematics of that equation never work out. The liquidation sales were heartbreaking. Parents brought their children to say goodbye to a place that had defined their own childhoods. Kids who barely understood what bankruptcy meant could sense that something important was ending. It was like watching the death of a national monument, except this monument had sold Barbie dolls and carried a 30-year mortgage. But here's the thing about Toys R Us's death that nobody wants to admit. It wasn't just about business models or debt loads. It was about the end of a particular kind of childhood experience. The experience of wandering through endless aisles of possibilities, of discovering toys you didn't know existed, of the tactile joy of actually holding something before you owned it. The company briefly attempted a comeback in 2019, opening a handful of stores that were part toy store, part playground, part desperate plea to remain relevant. It was like watching your grandfather try to use TikTok, admirable but ultimately missing the point. The new stores closed within 2 years because sometimes the patient is just too dead to revive. Today, former Toys R Us locations sit empty across America, slowly being converted into furniture stores, gyms, and other businesses that adults actually visit voluntarily. Geoffrey the Giraffe makes occasional appearances at other retailers, like a dethroned king making ceremonial visits to peasant villages. Thanks for watching, and as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below.